Well, I said that the next job would be an interesting one. And it is. Let's look at the state of this. I was telling someone yesterday that I hadn't done a jigsaw puzzle for some time. This is a pretty interesting jigsaw puzzle, I would think. I'll have to do a bit of a census, I suppose. Do a head count, find out who's here and who isn't. Right. Okay, let's try and see where we are. No leatherette for the base. Well, that's a nuisance. The exposure meter is lively, missing its cover glass. The lens, that looks okay. The front one does. The back one, yeah, it's very, very dirty. This camera has spent 105 days on, well, I was going to say on the high seas. It's probably spent 105 days in warehouses all around the world before it finally got here. But you know what the world's like at the moment. The front door. Yeah, I can detect a crack through there. I'm getting to see a pattern of that. Nothing serious. The button is very reluctant to return to the home position. The top cover. Well, the accessory shoe is somewhat distorted. The dial's missing off the top here. But this lever looks good, that all looks good. This is quite tidy. A bit of corrosion along here, but there's not much obvious corrosion on the top plate, so that it'll look quite tidy. The camera body. Interesting. So, someone's taken notice of my instructions and my warnings about losing your shutter release shaft, and they've got that held in quite firmly with a rubber band to stop it falling out and losing stuff. Here. What's going on here? Where's the retainer? The retainer's missing off there. Is it here somewhere? Here's a retainer plate missing off the front there. Oh, I think it's been put round the back. So there's a little bit of assembly error here. The retainer plate that sits on the front here and would hold the focus helical mechanism in place, I think it's around the back. Let's have a little investigate. This screw is the right screw, but it's not holding anything because the retainer plate's not there. This screw is the right screw, but it's not holding anything. This screw is the right screw, but it's not holding anything useful, as is that one. 4 screws. Let's lift out that inner and outer helical. The 4 screws that hold this in place are correct and they're in the right position. The screw heads are a little bit unhappy looking. They will get like that if they've been abused or even used. Now if we lift out this, what do we discover? Here is our retainer ring that should have been at the front. Here are 4 screws that hold the bellows to the back of the front standard, but they cannot go there. They have to be fitted right through that focus mount that I've just removed. Now I'll push those bellows away from the back of that front standard. Now they've been sitting in the extended position for some time, I can tell, because they don't instantly return to the inside of the body. So that's the mystery with those parts at least. Those parts had simply been assembled in the wrong order. Let's have a little look further at the body, see if there's anything else we can tell. The rangefinder is present, but it's very sticky. It's sluggish, it's slow to move back to the rest position. It's dirty. There's the traditional thumbprint on the back of the viewfinder there. That's quite normal. At this end, the prism has a slight chip on the end. Now, that is present when people have changed or attempted to change the shutter cocking rack without moving the rangefinder out of the way first. It's very easy to damage this if you're swinging tools around at this point. You can certainly achieve it without doing that, but less common. So the cocking rack, well, it's floating up in the air at the moment here. It's a bit hard to tell. Those teeth look good. I don't see an immediate problem with the teeth at the upper part of the rack, except that this has got some unusual habit of pointing uphill. I don't know why it's pointing uphill. It's not dropping back in place. Yeah, no, I think it's all right. So, well, I'll have to strip this down, find out what's not there. The focus parts, I'm quite happy I know what happened there now. Here, this shutter, oh look, we got a bit of a mess here. There's a shim from the back of the shutter, paper shim. Look at this retard gear train. The screw that holds it into the case there is present, but someone didn't know there was a screw there, I'd say at a guess, and they've tried to pull it out of the case. So the retard gear train's buggered. That's never going to fly again. That's a piece of the retard gear train. What can I see in the shutter? This little bracket that holds the main spring has lost a bit at the end. Where it would trap the spring in place, that piece is broken away, so that lever's broken and that's buggered. I don't remember having to replace one of these very frequently, so that's had it. That's had it. That's a piece of the retard gear train. The shutter, apart from that, that part cocks. If the shutter was cocked and released, that gets to the first part. If the self timer was back at the rest position, that should release. But something doesn't want to go. Alright. Let's have a look at the diaphragm. That moves freely enough, that's quite good. Alright, well I'm going to work here for a couple of minutes and separate these parts out. Usually I deal with the shutter separately to all the other pieces. So I'll separate my shutter parts into one pile. My camera body parts I'll put in another pile, and then I'll get everything ready for cleaning, I think. Okay, well I've had a chance to have a look at things and get them sorted into some semblance of order. The body parts I've got loose in the container here waiting to be cleaned. They can go through the ultrasonic cleaner. I'm going to continue stripping down the camera body here. Remove all the film advance components and everything else. They can all be cleaned at one time then. The only thing I've seen of interest so far are a couple of screws which I don't recognise, which probably means they come from some component that normally I would not separate when I'm working on the camera. However, we'll find out the answer to that later. Let's put that rangefinder to one side. Yeah, those screws, that was interesting. They've come from somewhere. They probably hold something on the camera that I don't... Oh, I know what they are now, that's right. They're part of the shutter. Nothing too mysterious. Right. This elastic band has given up the ghost. That would probably be hardly a surprise, given how old it is. Right. Let's start here. Can you see anything? Yeah, only just. What I'm seeing in front of me, this is all very clean. Like all of these parts have been removed and put back perhaps. Just not necessarily in the right places. Let's have the shutter release shaft out. That's certainly been cleaned. It's even got a little tiny spacer washer on there present. We'll catch that spring out of there, put that to one side, because springs like that tend to want to go places. Take the spring off the top of the lock lever. The spring and screw is already off the top of the release lever. Now this screw here, there's a chrome plated screw here. Now that should have been on the top cover, so that tells me that someone's been in here and already been doing mix and match with their components. So at the moment what I can immediately see is we'll need the leatherette for the camera base, the leatherette patch for the film advance lever, what else was there? Oh yeah, the retard gear train for the shutter, that's rubbish. Get this tripod socket off while we're here. And almost certainly there'll be something that I haven't immediately spotted that's going to require replacement, I would think. Well, no one's had that off because that's still sitting in place with a bit of glue. This would have been a very clean camera before it was dismantled. There's a little patch of corrosion here, but otherwise it's all quite clean. This, I need that rewind button off. Put the springs carefully to one side. I don't normally put the springs through the cleaner because they tend to get easy to lose, and they'll catch in the mesh of the sieve that I use when I'm rinsing and drying things, and they can get damaged. Get that screw out. This is a fairly early Retina IIIc camera. You can tell because it has the 10 blade diaphragm and the shutter. There are various other changes through the manufacturing process where things changed. That screws loose. That spring can go over there. Yes, this camera set a new record for me, 105 days to reach me. Lucky it was sent email. And to make matters worse, when it arrived here the carton looked somewhat battered, and there was a label stamped onto it saying received in wet condition, Auckland Mail Centre. So it had been sitting out somewhere in the rain. It's just lucky it had been packed so well. Actually, the newspaper inside the box used as packaging was pretty dry. It could have been much worse. Right, how's this going? I'm gathering up my pile of things to go into the ultrasonic cleaner. Now that screw is somewhat chewed up looking, suggests someone's had a go at that and perhaps they weren't successful at getting it out. That looks like the case to me. They're pretty chewed up looking. I think that they're going to need a bit of hammer time. give it a little tappy tap tap. Yep, and it's mate. At the top of the camera, the two screws there, will they come without a fight? One will. Its mate. Oh, no, its mate's not interested in moving. Let's give that a little tap too. It's always good to have a somewhat robust and probably not your first choice screwdriver to deal with problems like this. Right, that can come out. One screw here holds the bracket that holds this little transfer shaft in place. Take that out, transfer shaft and its bracket. While I've got this in bits, let's have a look at this cocking rack, because the top part of the rack looks good. The teeth on the bottom part of the rack are good. Okay, that's great, great result. Here's the little arm from the shutter release shaft, which causes so much grief if it gets loose and falls in behind the bellows. And the body is now stripped down as far as bodies need to be stripped. Let's have a look at this. Just take those two springs, put them aside. There's our two buttons, top and bottom of the shutter. Now this finger that transfers the action from the shutter release shaft to the lever on the shutter. You can tell this is an early camera because it doesn't have the wire spring at this position, which would return this to the up position. So that's another sign that this is an early camera. Not the earliest of the early. I've got a one with even more variations than that. And this just needs to be cleaned. You can probably see the filthy grease and dust and so forth inside this component. The body housing needs to be done. Likewise the front standard. These parts, they'll go straight into the degreaser and then the ultrasonic cleaner. While they're soaking, I'll clean these other parts, and I'll probably start on the shutter after that. This top cover, I'm working my way through the various parts of the body components, and mostly it's gone quite smoothly because, to tell the truth, there wasn't a lot to do. The componentry was comparatively clean and comparatively undamaged. That accessory shoe is going to need some attention, and I'll have to pull the glass out of this and clean this top cover up. It doesn't look in a bad state to me. I think it should be fairly straightforward. Okay, that's a good place to start. I'll start cleaning this now. I'm just using some naphtha on a cotton bud. First I'm just going to clean the outside down to remove any loose dust and dirt, grease it gives me a chance to inspect it closely, see if there are any areas of corrosion that I need to be considering. Oh, I thought that were patches of corrosion on the back there, but it wasn't. That's cleaned straight off, so that's a bonus. It looked like verdigris to me, but it was not. It was some verdigris coloured greasy stuff, and it cleaned away. It's quite common to find corroded patches or rough patches around the viewfinder, and I can only presume it's because it's awkward to get at, so you might notice something spilt or marking your camera and wipe it off, but around something like that it's hard to get at, and you probably wouldn't not notice, or notice but be unable to do anything about it. So I'm just cleaning around the boss here on the top of the camera that the meter follower needle runs round, and that's moving all very freely there. That doesn't need to come apart. Often that's stiff. Camera died on me there. I think it had come to the end of its battery. These components, as I say, are quite clean. They're not causing me any problem. It's very thin on paint on the back of that bracket. That's a bit odd. I wonder whether somebody's cleaned that with a bit of solvent and done that. A bit unusual. Perhaps they were just thin at getting the paint on there to start off with. Cleaning this glass up. We've got these windows to deal with. So I've got to clean both faces of the two windows and all four edges, because there's often smears of rubbish around the edges. If you don't clean the edges, those smears will find their way around to the front or back surface pretty promptly, and make it awkward to get things sparkly. And in the top cover itself, obviously we've got the eyepiece glass here. It's not difficult to get to the outside surface, and that's usually the dirtiest of them all. It's trickier to get to the inside surface. You can see from the colour of that how dirty that glass was. Mind you, that top cover had been travelling in a bag with various other loose mechanical parts. I'm cleaning the inside surface now. You can sort of swirl the cotton bud around, get quite a good cover. Much better than you'd expect through that little rectangular opening. Check that that looks good. That's quite good. This window on the top, of course that gathers up a fair bit of dust, being open to the elements as it is, being a nice little hollow so that you can't get at it. That looks very good too. That's I get the impression that this is a camera that had done very little work, so it was probably a very pretty example before it was taken apart. course it's not so impressive looking just at the moment when it's all in pieces. The only thing I really noticed that causes me some concern with this as I clean things was the paint loss on this door here. Now that's a bit unusual, and the aluminium underneath there is very shiny. Now I wonder whether it didn't get some preparation treatment prior to painting that they would normally get. I'm certainly not used to seeing paint coming off the door in that fashion. Certainly it chips, and you see plenty of doors with chipped paint, but I'm not used to seeing large areas all off in one place. So here I'm just getting the bracket that holds the front glass in place. It sits up on two standoffs, which is a bit Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse mostly because instead of using one thick standoff, they've used two thin standoffs, presumably because they thought that was a clever idea, or because that was just a handy thickness to be able to thump them out of sheet metal. It just makes it a bit awkward to get this together. I'll just slacken those screws off slightly. That'll allow me to slide the glass down in position. That's one, and the other piece, you can get it less of the other piece because it's of the diamond shaped window, so it's like a diamond shaped cutout. So it's important to get all the dust and rubbish off this because you won't be able to get to the rear surface of it once it's in place. And it's almost sitting correctly. Oh. There we are, it's sitting correctly now. And do those two screws up before it has a chance to shift. And we have the return spring for the frame counter. And I discovered some time ago that if you put this in upside down, things do not go well because the hook on the spring can catch on other components inside the camera and cause the frame counter not to work correctly. Well, that's good, all those glass pieces are in and clean, which brings me to this. Here we have the accessory shoe, and this accessory shoe is somewhat misshapen. I'm going to give this a couple of love taps and see if it comes into shape easily. I may have to use a few drastic methods to get this to sit flat. Oh, it's looking reasonably hopeful. Let's try this. That's good. That looks completely normal. Looks like a good example, in fact. The screws are a bit misshapen. If you do these screws up tight enough, or if the bracket gets mutilated enough, the slot, the screw head gets pulled up so that the slot closes. And that's what's happened in this case. It gives them a little bit of a hollow look instead of being completely flat on the top. Nothing particularly wrong with that. It's just the way they look. But that's fine. That top cover's good. But I really do want to reassemble the control knob, the dial that goes on there, because that didn't need to be taken apart in order to get to this stage. So see if I can find the components here for that and put it back together. One of them. I'm very pleased to see that that screw is intact, because they're somewhat hard to come by. They're easily damaged. That's it. So I'll clean these 4 components up and get that back on the top cover. And at least then part of the camera is as it should be. The mechanical components I still have in the degreaser, and they've yet to go through the ultrasonic cleaner, but I'm not expecting that to cause me any problems particularly. I think my number one concern at this stage is the shutter. Which I was going to do immediately after doing the putting the pieces in the cleaner, but I didn't. I decided just got dragged off to do this instead. It just seemed like the right thing to do. Okay, let's get that. A bit of lubricant. We will use a little bit of this synthetic grease, and we're not using much. So inside this track here, there's like a cam surface. So I'll put some on there. I'll wipe some around the inside. I'm putting very little on here. That's it. So that the follower works well. Right, there's a spring missing here. I'll have to go and find it.